So we learned about the spot healing brush already. And again, this is all in Quick Key J. So we've done the spot healing. Let's go through the other tools in the same tool group. So let's go back to our folder and let's work with healing tools 1. And I'm going to choose the JPEG file. So I have the original. And I'm going to do what I did before, which is Control J to duplicate the layer just in case we mess things up here. All right. So what we're going to do is move on to the healing brush. That's the second tool here. And the healing brush is a little bit different than spot healing. The spot healing lets you kind of paint over an area. This one lets you sample. So if you think about dipping your paintbrush into a paint bucket, you can pick different colors of paint. In this case, you can actually sample nearby pixels. Okay, so this one's weird because you have to use a keyboard. You're going to use your Alt key to sample. So think of the Alt key as dipping your paintbrush into the paint bucket. So I'm going to Alt click in this area here. I'm going to make my brush a little bit larger. And if you need to, you remember you can right click and reset the tool back to the default settings. So I'm going to still make my brush a little bit larger. Now I want you to look at my cursor. So I have a round brush, and when I hold my Alt key, you'll see my cursor change. And that's showing you you're going to sample when you have the Alt key. So if I click in this area here, I'm going to sample these pixels. So I'm going to Alt click, then I let go of the Alt key. Now my cursor is loaded with these pixels. So wherever I paint them, whether I paint them on the bird, you're going to see. And if you look very carefully, you can see your sample brush on that left area where you sampled. It looks like a little plus key. Let me sample from another area so you can see a little bit easier. So if I Alt click and sample the water here, and I go over here and I start painting the water, now you should be able to see my little plus on the left where I sample. Okay. All right, let's F12 that back. Let me show you. This is a little bit easier to understand. I'm going to Alt click and actually sample the bird. So it's loading my pixel with these white pixels, or it's loading my brush. Okay. So you can see now, look at my brush. It's loaded with white pixels. Most people say it's loaded with the bird, but it really is those pixels. And guess what you can do? You can paint another bird in. Still got it. I'm not alt sampling another area. I can put in another bird. Now it starts to look ridiculous when they're all the same size and in a row, right? But you get the idea here. Let's F12 one more time and look at some other uses for the healing. So again, what this lets you do is control the pixels. Let's close this file and let's go back to Healing Tools 9. This is going to be kind of fun for you. All right, let's do another Control J, and I'm going to Alt click and sample her eyeball. Okay, same tool. Remember, not spot healing. Look at the cursor, the icon difference here. Make sure you're on Healing Brush. Now let's talk about the options bar real quickly here. Always be in the normal mode, and then you have sampled or pattern. Just stay on sampled. Again, if you need to reset, just right click, reset the tool, and then you can just make your brush size a little bit bigger. So I'm going to use my square bracket key to sample her eye right in the middle. So remember what it does, right? It loads the cursor with those pixels. So if I want to give her a third eye up here on her forehead, I can give her a third eyeball. Okay. If I want to give her a second set of lips, I can Alt click and sample a different region and then decide where I want to paint it in. All right. Now, if I start to use too large of a brush or I keep going, it ends up painting all of those surrounding pixels, right? So it's giving you the option here to keep painting. So all the Alt clicking does is give you a paint source. I'm going to F12 again. Let me Control J, duplicate the layer. So if I use a really large brush and I Alt click, then you can see exactly what it's picking up. And depending on where I paint it, this is what I get. Now I start to get weird effects here also. There's another tool that we'll get to in another video that actually paints exactly the same pixels, and see how this is darker here. Now feel free to explore with different settings in here. You know, if you increase the diffusion, what happens? If you decrease the diffusion, what happens, okay? So feel free to experiment with different things. All right, let's close that file. I'm not saving this. Let's see, let's go on to another tool. All right, let's work with Healing Tools 1 again. Let's duplicate, Control J, and we're actually going to switch tools this time. Let's go to the patch tool so you understand the patch tool. So the patch tool works like this. I'm going to have you right click and reset the tool so it starts with the default settings. And we're going to take a loose selection of the bird. I don't want you to get too close, okay? So we're just going to kind of make a loose selection. And we're patching. So if you think about patching anything like a hole in the wall or a hole in clothing, we are basically sewing up this area. Watch what happens. I'm going to take my cursor. Look at my cursor, it has little arrows on it now. I can pick that up and say patch it with wherever I let go of my mouse. So, and it sort of blends it out. Okay, I'm going to hit Control D so we can look at the results. Not terrible. Okay, let's undo that. Control Alt Z a couple of times. This time, let's patch with water just so you can see. So what's happening here? Look at your options bar. Patching with the source. Okay. So I don't like this tool. I think the other tools are a little bit more useful, but I'm just exposing you to all of the different tools. If you want to experiment, what does the patch tool do when you work with the girl? You can go and open that file and give it a go. I'm going to keep moving on here. All right, I'm going to F12 this file back. Let's stay on the same document here, and let's go to the Content Aware Move tool. Again, I'm going to Control J just to leave my original file or my original layer intact. And this one, we do kind of the same thing we were doing before. Let's make a loose selection of this bird. Okay, we don't want perfect selections. And now I'm going to pick it up, and this tool again is called the Content Aware Move. So I'm going to move these pixels and fill in the area where I took them from. Okay, and then when I hit Enter or hit my check mark in the options bar, you can see what it does. So it moved the bird and it patched the area. Now, look at the selection I made, look at the result. Not the greatest thing, right? So let's undo that. This time, let's zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to do a Control D, and let's try a little bit closer. So just kind of, this is where it gets tricky. All right, I'm doing a horrible job, but you can get a little bit better at this. I'm going to pick my pixels up and move them, and then when I hit Enter or lock in the change, you can see what it did. Not the greatest. So there's a fine line between getting too close to the selection and too broad of a selection. So I didn't like the result of that one. So I'm going to Control D to deselect, and this time I'm really going to try to concentrate. Want to go a little bit larger than the area you're trying to remove. And then once you have your selection, pick it up and move it wherever you want. Now, if I move it way over here where there's lighter pixels, it might not look as good. So let's move them just a little bit to the left, see what Photoshop does. And hit Enter. So again, it patched this area and moved the bird over here. Results aren't that great. Now, there's nothing that says you can't use another tool to patch up. So if we want to paint kind of the exact same pixels, let's go and clean this up with the, let's do the healing brush so we can sample. My brush is really large, and we go a little bit smaller. And I'm going to sample nearby pixels, Alt-click, and then kind of paint them in. Now, this brush might be a little large. So don't be afraid to go in there, use one tool, and then use another tool to sort of clean it up. All right, what else we got left in here? Red eye tool. Let's close this file, and I gave you a file in here in your same folder. Use number 7 for the red eye. Red eye is super easy. I'm sure you've used it on your cell phone before, so let's move on to the red eye tool. And you just click right on those red pixels, and it knows to pick up those pixels. Now, there's a difference. So what this tool does is it knows the difference between the red pixels and then leaving the pupil area recognizable. Because here's what some people do that don't know how to use the red eye tool, right? They look at this picture, I'm just Control Alt Z. They go to their B, right, for the brush tool. Let me reset this back to black, and they'll go, all right, well, I'm just going to make it black. Okay, this looks like Demon Child. That is weird. So again, the proper way, and if you want to control J, I'm just not going to save it, so is to use the red eye tool. And again, all you do is just click. Now you have some options in the options bar up here where you can change pupil size and the darken amount. Every image is going to be a little bit different, so don't be afraid to experiment. So now we've gone through the 5 tools in this Quick Key J category: spot healing, healing, patch, content aware, and red eye. And every tool kind of has its job, kind of like, you use a screwdriver to screw in a screw. You don't use a screwdriver to hammer in a nail. And a lot of it just takes practice to determine what tool to use for the job that you're trying to do.